I grew up in a house that looked perfect from the outside. White columns, a manicured lawn, the kind of place realtors would call prestigious. But inside, I was nothing more than a reminder of my father's mistake. I was the kid from the affair, the family secret everyone knew, but no one ever acknowledged. At school events, relatives introduced me with that tight smile and a quick change of subject, like I was a stain on the carpet they couldn't scrub out. Eleanor, my father's wife, the woman who technically raised me, never once called me by my name. To her, I was the extra, the charity case, or most often just trash. Once, when I earned a partial scholarship to a summer program, she didn't yell. She didn't even argue. She just took the acceptance letter, ripped it clean in half, and dropped it straight into the kitchen trash can, right in front of our dinner guests. The sound of that paper crumpling under coffee grounds is something I'll never forget. Neither is the laughter that followed. My half-brother, Andrew, the golden boy, leaned back in his chair and smirked at me like it was a comedy skit. He always had that smile, the one that said, "You'll never belong here. I do, and you don't." That was my normal, the mansion, the money, the picture-perfect family photo above the fireplace, and me, shoved to the side, unnamed, unwanted. I learned early on that silence was safer than speaking, but silence also remembers. If chapter 1 of my life was being called trash inside our home, chapter 2 was learning how to play decoration outside of it. My family threw parties the way some people breathe, effortlessly, constantly, and with just enough flair to make the neighbors jealous. Holiday dinners, charity galas, birthday brunches for Andrew. There was always an excuse, and every time I was dragged along, not as a guest, but as part of the backdrop. I was positioned at the edge of group photos, the kid half cut off by the frame. Eleanor would place her manicured hand on Andrew's shoulder, her smile flawless for the cameras, while I stood 2 steps behind, trying not to blink when the flash went off. Later, those photos would hang in the front hallway of our house, evidence of a family that looked whole, even if one piece was treated like it didn't belong. The contrast was brutal. In public, they were sweet. They praised me for my resilience, as if I were some kind of charity project they were sponsoring for tax purposes. But the moment the guests were gone, the words changed. Parasite. Mistake. Shadow. My biological mother, the woman my dad had the affair with, wasn't strong enough to shield me from any of it. She relied on the monthly support check, and that dependence turned into silence. She would lower her eyes when Eleanor cut me down, whispering later, "Just keep your head down. Don't make trouble. It's safer this way." So, I learned. I learned how to keep my face blank when the insults came. I learned how to watch without reacting, how to carry every cruel word like a stone in my pocket. And most of all, I learned how to remember. Because silence doesn't mean forgetting. It means building an archive for later. By 16, I had already mastered silence. I could sit through entire dinners without saying a word, smile just enough for family pictures, and nod when people called us the perfect family. But that day, Eleanor decided silence wasn't enough. It was a family meeting, which in our house meant a staged performance. Lawyers, extended relatives, even the estate manager, all sitting in the living room while Eleanor held court like a queen. My dad was away on business, as usual. She waited until everyone had coffee cups in hand before she turned to me. "This child," she said, pointing like I was a stain on the rug, "is nothing but garbage. Keeping her here only makes us look pathetic." The room went still. No one spoke. That was the way it always went. Everyone heard, no one interfered. Then Eleanor picked up the folder on the table, my application to a boarding school I had worked months on, with essays, recommendations, and even the early acceptance letter. She ripped the packet in half and tossed it into the kitchen trash can like it was junk mail. The sound of it hitting the coffee grounds and orange peels felt louder than her voice. Andrew, of course, didn't miss the chance. He lifted his phone, recording as he laughed. "Look at that." He grinned. "Trash goes in the trash. Finally makes sense." The adults gave nervous chuckles, the kind you hear at a joke you don't want to admit is cruel. No one stopped him. No one stopped her. I just stood there, silent. Outside, I was still. Inside, my chest cracked open. That was the moment I realized silence wasn't just survival anymore. It was evidence. And someday, silence would be the weapon they never saw coming. At school, I was invisible by design. I kept my head down, turned in assignments on time, and made sure no one ever saw the bruises when they were fresh. Being overlooked was safer. But not everyone overlooked me. Mrs. Wilson, our career counselor, wasn't the warm and fuzzy type. She was practical, sharp, and had this way of looking at you like she could spot a lie before you even opened your mouth. One afternoon, she stopped me as I was leaving her office with a stack of college prep brochures. Her eyes landed on the faint mark around my wrist, the one from Eleanor's grip the night before, and then on my face. "You don't say much, do you?" she asked. I froze, waiting for the usual follow-up. "Are you okay? Do you need help?" But she didn't ask that. Instead, she leaned back in her chair and said quietly, almost like a challenge, "If they treat you like garbage, prove them wrong. Show them garbage can be recycled into something they never saw coming." It wasn't pity. It wasn't even sympathy. It was strategy. That sentence burrowed into me. It gave shape to something I'd been carrying for years. The idea that my silence wasn't weakness. It could be leverage. So I started keeping records. At first, it was just a notebook. Small, spiral-bound, easy to hide. Every insult, every time Eleanor called me mistake, or Andrew called me extra baggage, I wrote it down. Then I added dates, times, even who was in the room. For the first time, my silence wasn't just survival. It was building a case. And in the back of my mind, Mrs. Wilson's words played on repeat. Recycled. Something they never saw coming. By the time I turned 17, I'd become Andrew's unpaid errand runner. He'd toss me his car keys, make me carry his dry cleaning, or send me to fetch files from his desk when he was too busy hanging out with friends. One evening, he called me into his room while he was out. "Grab the blue folder in my drawer," he texted. "Don't screw it up." That folder wasn't just notes for class, like he claimed. Inside were documents stamped with words I didn't fully understand at first. Offshore accounts, shell corporations, wire transfers. Eleanor's name showed up in some of them. And then, buried in the paperwork, was mine. Not my handwriting, not my signature. Just my name and social security number, listed under several small investment accounts. They were using me as a shield, filing shady transfers under my identity, just in case anyone ever came asking questions. My stomach dropped. To them, I wasn't just trash. I was disposable cover. I snapped photos with my phone, every page, every number. My hands shook so badly, I thought I'd blur the images, but adrenaline kept me steady enough. I zipped the folder shut and slid it back exactly where I found it, praying Andrew wouldn't notice. That night, I transferred the photos to a hidden drive and tucked it away like it was gold. Because in a way, it was. It was proof that their corruption ran deeper than insults. It was proof they weren't untouchable. For years, they'd told me I was worthless. But now, I had something they couldn't buy back, shred, or laugh off. Trash burns hottest when you set it on fire. Living in that house felt like serving a sentence with no parole. Every day, Eleanor had a new way to remind me I didn't belong. Snide comments at breakfast, public digs about how I lived off their generosity, and sometimes a grip on my arm hard enough to leave bruises. Andrew piled on with his own brand of cruelty, usually in the form of laughter recorded on his phone for later. On the outside, I stayed quiet. On the inside, I was freezing over. I wrote everything down. The insults, the slaps, the accidental shoves against the banister. I logged dates, times, names of whoever else was in the room. My notebooks looked like homework assignments, but they were really a ledger of every wound. At the same time, I searched for ways out. I applied for small scholarships, after-school programs, anything that gave me a few hours away from that house. That's how I ended up in a local youth program focused on law and finance. The program director introduced me to a volunteer mentor, Mr. Carter. He wasn't the kind of lawyer you see in glossy ads on billboards. He was quiet, with tired eyes and a calm way of speaking that made you actually listen. One night, while reviewing a mock case study, he noticed how detailed my notes were. He raised an eyebrow and asked, "You always document like this?" I shrugged. "It's just a habit." He leaned in. "Good habit. Don't shout. Don't beg. If you want to win against people with power, you beat them with paper. Dates. Evidence. The kind of truth they can't burn or deny." It was the first time an adult hadn't told me to toughen up or get over it. He wasn't telling me to fight louder. He was teaching me to fight smarter. And so the wall of silence around me grew higher. On the outside, I was still the unwanted kid in the mansion. But behind that wall, I was stockpiling every piece of ammunition I'd ever need. By the time I turned 18, I had perfected the art of being invisible in my own house. So when Andrew threw his over-the-top birthday party, complete with catered food, a rented DJ, and half the senior class packed into the living room, I wasn't invited as a guest. I was assigned a role, server. Eleanor handed me a tray of champagne flutes and told me, "At least this way you'll finally be useful." I smiled just enough to keep the peace, but under my jacket, I had something new, a small pinhole camera Carter had helped me get. It wasn't much bigger than a button, and no one was paying attention to me anyway. Hours into the party, after the music got loud and the drinks stronger, I overheard Eleanor and Andrew in the corner near the bar. They were laughing, Eleanor with her glass of wine, Andrew waving his phone around like a trophy. "You know the best part?" Andrew said, grinning wide. "Every cent of debt, every risky transfer, we pushed all of it under my name. If anyone checks, the only loser is him. And who cares? He's already nothing." Eleanor laughed, tipping her glass. "Exactly. That's what trash is for. To cover up the mess." The words hit like a slap, but this time I didn't flinch. Because the camera caught every second. Their voices, their faces, their smug smiles. Later that night, when the house was quiet and the guests had left, I met Carter in his office. I handed him the memory card, my pulse racing. "We could take this to the police tomorrow," he said after watching the clip. I shook my head. "Not yet. If we go now, it'll be swept under the rug. They'll pay someone off. They'll spin it. I want this to happen when they can't hide. When the whole family, the lawyers, maybe even the press are watching." Carter studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "So, when's the stage?" I answered without hesitation. "At the will reading. My father's will. That's when this all ends." My father's death wasn't a shock. His heart had been failing for years, but the timing was. One morning, I woke up to hushed phone calls, black suits, and a household already preparing for its next performance. By the time the will reading came, the mansion was crowded with relatives I hadn't seen in years, all dressed in expensive black and whispering about what slice of the estate they might get. Out front, reporters lingered near the gates, cameras ready to catch a glimpse of the grieving, perfect family. Inside, Eleanor and Andrew were glowing with confidence. She wore pearls, he wore a custom suit, and they both sat front and center like royalty waiting for their coronation. I, of course, was shoved to the back of the room, deliberately ignored, as if I were just staff who'd wandered in by mistake. The lawyer cleared his throat and began. Eleanor leaned forward, Andrew smirked. And then Carter stood up, calm, steady. His voice carried across the room. Before we proceed with the distribution of assets, there are some materials that need to be reviewed. The lights dimmed, and a projector flickered on. First clip, Eleanor at the dining table, ripping my scholarship letter in half and tossing it in the trash. Gasps echoed through the room. Second clip, Andrew, grinning at his phone, calling me trash, while relatives sat by and chuckled. The smirk on his face, frozen on the screen, looked uglier under the fluorescent light. Third set, documents, real ones, flashed across the screen. Bank accounts, wire transfers. Investments shifted into my name without consent. Carter narrated as the room fell silent. These records show years of financial misconduct, tax evasion, fraudulent transfers. The beneficiary used was not only underage at the time, but completely uninformed. The name on these accounts? His. And then he pointed to me. The room turned. Dozens of eyes landed on me at once. Not with pity, but with dawning horror. The whispers started. They used him? With his social? At 16? Eleanor's smile collapsed. Andrew's hand clenched his armrest, his face drained of color. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the one shrinking in that room. They were. The room erupted the second Carter finished. Eleanor shot to her feet, voice shrill. "This is fabricated! None of this is real!" Andrew just sat there, pale, gripping the armrest so hard his knuckles turned white. For once, the golden boy had nothing to say. And me? I stood up. For the first time, I wasn't trembling. "I didn't come here for money," I said, my voice steady. "I didn't come here to fight over the scraps of this estate. I came here to end something." The lawyer's assistant slid a folder in front of me, documents I had spent weeks preparing with Carter. I opened it slowly, deliberately, so everyone could see. "This is a formal petition," I continued. "I am legally severing ties with this family. From this day forward, Eleanor, you don't get to call me your son. Andrew, you don't get to call me your brother. You don't get my name, my signature, my silence. You get nothing." I signed my name at the bottom of the page, pen on paper. Final. Gasps filled the room. Cameras clicked. Some relative in the back muttered, "He's walking away." But it wasn't just walking away, it was erasing them. The second document followed, a formal complaint to the state attorney's office, detailing the fraudulent accounts under my identity. No more secrets. No more covers. Their mess was finally theirs to own. Reporters outside caught the flashes through the window. Eleanor's face was twisted, somewhere between rage and panic. Andrew looked like someone had just yanked the floor out from under him. For the first time, the performance was theirs to survive, not mine. And as I stood there, pen still in hand, I realized something simple but powerful. I wasn't their stain. I wasn't their scapegoat. I wasn't their trash. I was my own name, and I chose it. I walked out of that mansion without looking back. No yelling, no slammed doors. Just quiet steps down a marble hallway that no longer belonged to me. A week later, I signed a lease for a one-bedroom apartment above a used bookstore downtown. The rent was cheap, the floors creaked, and the window overlooked a busy street instead of manicured lawns. But it was mine. With Carter's guidance and the scholarships I'd fought for, I enrolled in college. Days were filled with lectures, nights with part-time shifts at the bookstore. It was exhausting, But it was freedom, the kind you taste in every late-night coffee and every exam you survive on your own terms. Back at the mansion, things unraveled fast. Eleanor's name surfaced in the investigation. Tax fraud, money laundering. The same papers she once tossed into the trash were now front-page news. Andrew, stripped of his inheritance, floundered without the safety net he had mocked me for never having. Months later, on a gray afternoon, I found myself walking past the old estate. The gates were locked, the windows dark. Paint peeled at the edges of the shutters, and the lawn had grown wild. A place once so polished now stood hollow, like a stage with no actors left. I paused, staring at the house that had spent years convincing me I was disposable, and then I smiled. Trash can be recycled, I whispered to myself. It can become something stronger, something new. But rot just stinks until it disappears. And with that, I kept walking, shoulders steady, name my own, finally free.